Thanks, Tom. I'd like to welcome everyone back to part two of our conversation with Shon Lyublanovits, the program lead for cyber supply chain risk management at CISA. Shon, before the break, we had started talking a little bit about acquisition security, and one of the big initiatives across government right now is software supply chain security. Of course, it was kind of sparked. The current iteration of that work was sparked by the Cybersecurity Executive Order from May of 2021, subsequent directives from OMB. CISA has done a lot here. Can you talk about how your program, your team is helping to support these across government software supply chain security initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. It's interesting, right when we stood up the PMO, we had the opportunity to work on M2218 and really develop a strong connection with our vulnerability management group. A lot of folks are familiar with a lot of the messing that Alan Friedman's been doing in regards to SBOM. And so it's really a great opportunity for my team to really support OMB in thinking and implementing very important parts of that memo. So we have done a lot of great things at this point. We've developed the attestation form. We've done our first public comment period. We are adjudicating those comments right now, and we're preparing for the 30-day comment period. So we most certainly have appreciated all of the feedback and the recommendations that folks have sent in to really help make sure that that attestation form is usable, right? We want it to not only just develop a form, it needs to be usable. And going back to that acquisition piece, it's got to be executable from an acquisition standpoint. So we spent a lot of time working with our acquisition counterparts to make sure that the language that we put in this form was easy and clear to understand as they move towards the language in the FAR, but also so that industry could leverage that. So we will continue to support OMB and work with our VM team on those important components as we prepare to make that final. Part of that, of course, is critical software, though, and really helping agencies think and identify what critical software is. So going back to our team that helps with best practice guides, we really are thinking about critical job aids. Is there anything that we can provide agencies to start that conversation to help them identify critical software? So our team's working on that now. So my messaging is really to continue to stay tied to your screen or to your computer monitor. Look for the latest things that are coming out as we prepare for that 30-day comment period.
We'll have to look out for that, certainly. I think that's something that a lot of folks are really interested in. You mentioned you wanted to make this form as usable as possible. How have you tried to walk that line with what you're asking for from vendors when it comes to how they develop their software? Because that could be a touchy subject, of course, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot of opinions already on what was in the form.
We have, but I will say all of our vendor community has been extremely gracious in giving us good advice and input. There is a burden, right, when it comes to providing anything to the government. So we want to work on helping agencies understand what they're asking for. So maybe they're asking once, right? If a vendor is supporting 5 agencies, can they provide it one time? So we're thinking about those instructions that are in the form and how we can make those as simple as possible. SBOM is a big topic that continues to come up. And so, as we've stated plenty of times, OMB has been very helpful in saying that right now that's optional. One for those companies that want to be a little bit proactive and provide that they can, but we don't want to overburden in the beginning and have a whole bunch of SBOMs coming in at one time. So that's going to be optional.
Got it. And so I guess we'll have to see what's in the 30-day form that comes out. But is it essentially CISA is going to release this as a final form, and then there will be a 30-day public comment period before it goes into effect?
Yeah, as we continue to get final guidance from OMB, our goal is to say, right, here is to the best of our ability, the form as it sits in the current draft. You know, I always say there's always opportunities to improve down the road, but here's a good version for now. And here's the last opportunity to provide your input. And so, again, we're going to take that wholeheartedly and do everything that we can to support OMB in putting out a final form.
And, my understanding is part of this is CISA is going to kind of act as a central repository for a lot of this software supply chain security information. Is that something that your office is leading, involved in? How is that work going to kind of, as you put it, make sure vendors don't necessarily, and agencies don't have to request something twice. It's all kind of there in one place.
Yeah, my team is not working on the repository piece. It is in another part of CISA. But I know that they are working very closely with OMB, again, to make sure that we are intentional in how that is put out and to make it useful. But no, my team is not part of that for right now.
Got it. And you mentioned something really interesting about critical software and making sure agencies know what critical software is. You said you were providing some guidance to help them with that. Can you talk a little bit more about what help agencies need there and how you're trying to make sure they can really designate what is critical and what isn't?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Anytime you ask an agency what's critical, it depends, right? Because it's mission focused. We want it to give sort of a starting place. It's not necessarily an end all be all, but, we as a team kind of sat in a room together and said, is there anything that we can provide to help agencies get started, especially those that are struggling? So they are working right now on some critical job aids that will be more example, right? Here's kind of the path you can follow that will help eliminate what you would deem as critical software in your own agency.
Interesting. I'm sure that'll be very helpful for some agencies. I also wanted to ask you about the support to the Federal Acquisition Security Council. I think you mentioned that was one of your three main nodes groups at your PMO is really working on that. Where is the FASC at, I guess, in its work today, and how is this team going to help kind of operationalize that work going forward?
Yeah, the FAST has done a tremendous amount of work over the last couple of years, and we were so pleased to have reauthorization for another 10. So now that we know that we're going to be here to stay, so to speak, we want to really think about what the overall approach and fill should look like. And the lead at OMB has been very intentional in thinking about what new working groups that we can sort of stand up to think about things such as policy and governance, information sharing. So you'll start to see a little bit more structure, more pillars sort of come together from the FASC so that as, we look at potential sources, we'll have, more concrete and more procedural ways to respond, right? It will be more definite and concrete. Another thing that we want to make sure that we're focusing on is having ways to share information. When we are looking at supply chain risk information, where is it being collected? How are we sharing it? So we understand that there are some technology advancements that we need to do within our own program, because we want agencies to get to a position where they can actually start sharing SCRI that the FASC can look at.
When the FASC was first developed, obviously Section 889 was the big focus at that time. I don't know, have there been any lessons learned, any sort of review of what that whole exclusion how that process worked and what the lessons learned are going forward for the federal government?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, definitely looking at Part A and Part B of 889 was very much sort of a on your mark, get set, go. I think if we were in a better position to share information to the vendors so that they understood how we plan to respond through Part A and Part B. And two, if we're going to remove, we've got to be able to help agencies prepare to have off ramps, but also other vendors in play to help take that place of that vendor that we're having to remove. So when we're thinking about acquisitions and we select a vendor, what other pools of vendors are available to kind of help backfill if we need to remove one? So, I talked a little about earlier about those task force and those working groups that we want. That's where some of that governance and processes is going to take place, because we need to have guidance to help agencies recover, right? If we need to remove. And I don't think that there's enough meat behind how agencies can do that today that we want to work through. And again, that's where we're really going to see some movement with some of our technology initiatives, because as we are sharing and collecting information, we're able to kind of share it better and store certain things so that agencies can kind of come back and review those at a later date.
Interesting. And yeah, I mean, understanding what vendors are there to backfill, potentially backfill. I mean, that again pulls in, I guess, those acquisition folks who are doing the market research every day on different aspects of technology.
That's what makes resilience, right? I mean, that is improving resilience in our acquisitions. And so that's going to be groundbreaking for us to really start having those conversations.
I mean, the Defense Department has done a lot of work, I think congressionally mandated work over the last 7 years, looking at their industrial base and single points of failure. And those annual reports are often stark reminders of how quickly, the industrial base that the government relies upon is often somewhat fragile, I guess. I mean, is that does that have any relation to, I guess, any of the cyber supply chain conversations that are ongoing, whether you're looking at telecom or microelectronics or things like that?
Yeah, I definitely think in general, we are trying to be a little bit more intentional and strategic when it comes to building resilience, right? And that's just one sliver of this pie, is making sure that we've got a pool of vendors that can come and support where needed. I think there is so much that has happened very recently, even outside of technology, right? We can look at the baby formula shortage, right? We know firsthand what it means to not have more than a couple of suppliers, right? If something happens in that chain there.
I guess that gets back to the mindset that we were talking about earlier as well. All right. One thing I wanted to ask you about here is, since you're one of the kind of leading C-SCRM experts in government, are there any misconceptions or missing considerations that you think are particularly important to highlight around supply chain security?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the opportunity. C-SCRM is not a one and done thing. We must continually look at and reevaluate our posture. And we've got to treat it like insurance. Insurance is one of those things where we're paying on it every month or every quarter that we don't necessarily see the value of until something happens. And we've got to look at the point where C-SCRM is our insurance for how well we're able to operate as a nation. And so I'd like to see us really make it a priority, a top priority, not because the SolarWinds happens, not because we found out about a vendor, but because it's part of our day-to-day processes.
Got it. And you just kind of tipped into my next question here. The Government Accountability Office has previously done reports that found, I think as recently as 2020, a collection of agencies were largely neglecting best practices for supply chain risk. You just talked about a little bit. What is the future state of supply chain security look like in the federal government? GAO comes out and does another one of these reports in a year from now. What are you hoping to see in the future?
So it's hard to say future state. What I would hope, right, if I had my magic wand, is that we have improved from those previous reports. But I also would like to see, a place where we're able to have more intentional conversations about what it means to be operating in this space. And I don't necessarily like to, look at negligence. I think some agencies really find this to be hard to tackle. So the more that we can help people bite this elephant up into small chunks and eat it, I think the better off we'll be. But yeah, it's tough to figure out where to start in supply chain because it's so big and complex. But I think as an agency, CISA really is moving forward with trying to be that lighthouse. There are a lot of scrim storms out there, but if we can be the lighthouse for agencies, we want to be able to do that through all the great work going on in CISA, not just through my office, but through others who really are taking the charge in this space.
And a related question here: what technologies or risks or challenges are you most concerned about going forward when it comes to cyber supply chain risk management?
So that's a tough question. I can tell you what's coming up on the rise that I need to start paying attention to, right? Definitely AI and machine learning. AI is going to be a big thing that we need to start paying attention to a little bit more and understanding. What has always been on the rise is telecommunications, because it's just kind of everywhere in everything that we do. We cannot drop the ball on, keeping up with the pulse of where telecommunications is going. So that's one thing that I'm looking at. But also on the flip side, on the offensive side, from a technology standpoint, making sure that we've got the right tools in place to look at these vendors, right? To do a lot of our supplier illumination and vendor risk assessment. So we're going to be looking offensively at tools that we need to kind of illuminate and combat some of the things that we're seeing.
Interesting. A couple of follow-ups there. On that last point, I've heard this term supplier illumination tools before. What exactly are those tools? Are they in use at CISA or across government today? And are you hoping to increase their use going forward?
Definitely increase their use, right? I don't want to mention any by name because I don't want to necessarily promote a particular vendor. But there are a couple of things, right, that I want to make sure I get across, right? So if we're looking at supplier illumination, it really is shining a light on connectivity of vendors, right? If I'm looking at vendor A, but I'm noticing, there's vendor G and H that are giving me some pause or concern, I need to be able to look into that. At the same time, vendor risk assessment, when I put my acquisition together and I'm thinking about a new contract, is there a test? Is there a bar, right, that we need these vendors at before they can bid on these contracts? And that's where vendor risk assessment comes in, because it says, these are my criteria, right? If you fall below this, then you're not the right vendor for this solution. So it's really moving forward and being more thoughtful about the vendors that we're having on some of these contracts.
Is that vendor risk assessment, is that something that you're hoping to test out or pilot here in the near term at all?
So a lot of agencies have been and are currently using it. I think that we can increase usage and really help some other agencies that are just starting to enter this space understand how to make good use of the data that they're going to be pulling through these tools.
And then working backwards through some of the things you mentioned telecom. There was just so much consternation around 5G for, gosh, what was it, at least 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And now 5G is here in large part. Are you saying, sort of you're looking at now 6G or the next level of connectivity? Does it go deeper and broader than that in the telecom space? What are some of the challenges there?
All of the above for sure. There's just so much that we could probably dive into in the telecom space that I'll reserve for now. But we are keeping our eye on the pulse. And even, again, 889 is not dead. NDAA 889 is not dead. So we're still very certainly looking forward to evaluating those vendors, right, from the telecom side that are not meeting certain criteria.
And then, finally, AI, machine learning. I think probably every single one of the panels that we've done on the Cyber Leaders Exchange this year has probably had some mention of AI, some question on AI. From a supply chain risk management perspective, though, I mean, that's kind of an interesting take on this that I don't think a lot of people maybe are thinking about right now. What are the concerns there on AI specifically?
AI can be very pervasive and persuasive, right? You can take that thing and make it do a lot. And so my head always starts to hurt when I think about just AI in general and what it can do. I think we need to understand a bit more about how we're using AI in government, and then really think about what controls that we can kind of put in place to limit security concerns. But also, again, on the supply chain side of the house, I really want to think about how easily it is to take code, right, that we use for AI and all of those different things, and making sure that there's good pedigree behind that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It always seems to be the conversation of the yin and the yang. It can help you, it can hurt you.
Yeah,
You just got to be aware of what is going on under the hood, I guess. So to speak.
absolutely.
All right, in the minute or so we have left, are there any closing thoughts, anything you'd want to lead folks with, point folks to going forward?
One, I want to thank you for the opportunity. We're grateful as an agency to share our knowledge and our passion in the C-SCRM space. But, I would always point to the fact that C-SCRM is such an important part of the work that we're doing in our nation, period. I don't want to even stop and say the government, but in our nation, period. And I think as we continue to come together and have conversations and starting somewhere, we'll be able to move the needle forward. I always say that it's a marathon, not a sprint in the C-SCRM space. So just taking it a little bit at a time.
All right. Well, again, I'd like to thank today's guest, Shon Lyublanovits, the program lead for cyber supply chain risk management at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Thank you again, Shon.
Thank you.
I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cyber Leaders Exchange.